There we go. So we're talking about the submittal and RFI workflow, and we're building upon all of our basic knowledge of how Newforma works with navigation and search, but we're going to be working on that in the contract management module. So just like before, I'll do a couple of PowerPoints, then I'll go directly into my training environment, and we'll take a look at that there. Feel free to ask questions along the way if you have them. And for those who weren't in the workflow consultation, we're really talking about managing the workflow around really all of contract management, but specifically we're talking about RFIs and submittals today. But it could really be addenda, bulletins, change orders, that kind of thing. And not only managing the workflow of when we receive things and who we forward to and what we say when we close items, but also the communication around all of those items. And if new items come out of those existing items, like if we have a question that comes in as an RFI and that causes us to have a bulletin or an addenda or a change order, then we can relate those items to one another. So we'll see that as well within Newforma. And the two main workflows in Newforma are the create and the receive. So I'm either the creator of an item, if I was the one who was submitting a submittal, or I was the one with the question, and so it was my RFI, then I would be the creator of that item. Or if I'm receiving it from someone else, so if it comes in via email, which seems to be the case in most parts, or if it's something like shop drawings coming in and we receive those via email, then we can record them directly into Newforma. And then the middle part of the workflow in both cases is either, we have the forward to review, and we could forward internally, externally outside of our firm. We can forward to multiple people at one time, and we can even forward in a review order. So if it needs to go to one person, then another person, then another person, and then recording those responses. So either through info exchange or directly into Newforma. So if something got forwarded to me internally, I could just go into Newforma and record my response. So we'll take a look at that as well in regards to, reviewing something, stamping it, etc. And then we're either doing the send and close. If we were the creator of an item, to say we had a bulletin or an addenda, we could create that bulletin and then send and close it. Or if we receive the item, we're going to do a respond and close as our closing action. Now, just so that everybody is aware, the middle part of the workflow is completely optional. So if there is an email that comes in with a question and I'm the one answering the question, I can go from the receive directly to the respond and close. I don't have to forward it to myself, record my response, and then go to the respond and close. I can also track the workflow in any way needed, whether it's email, info exchange, snail mail, courier, fax, hand delivery. I can do any of those functions within Newforma to track the workflow in that way. So for the most part, things are electronic, and we want to steer people towards info exchange as well. But if it's something that's not electronic, it still can be tracked with the project in Newforma for whatever that contract management item happens to be. But for the most part, things are electronic. Okay. And what we're going to go over today is really logging or adding submittals and RFIs, forwarding, looking at how we would record a review response, or if we're doing our own review. And, like I said, opening something in the viewer and stamping it, how we would do that, closing those items. So if we do a send and close or a respond and close, the reports that are available, and then, of course, info exchange. So we'll take a look at what it looks like on the project website to both internal and external people, and how you would be able to respond to items if you were out of the office, or other people could send in submittals or RFIs using the project website. So let's go ahead and hop into my training environment here. And I think I have a reminder turned on, so we're going to dismiss that one. So we're really talking about this contract management module. We're really going to focus in here on the submittals and the RFIs today, but just know that there is more available in here that you would have available to you if you've turned that on for your project. So you do have the ability to have more in there. So with the submittals, I'm just going to show you what it looks like once they're in here, and then we'll actually go into adding them. But when the submittals are in the Activity Center, you can see in the dropdown, I have it so that I could see all of the submittals. Anything pending incoming would be things just like we saw through Info Exchange. If it's sent in from the project website, it's considered pending until we receive it. Anything in draft mode would be things that we had created if we were the creator of a submittal, but we hadn't done anything with it. So we hadn't forwarded it or closed it. And then, of course, under review is going to break it out into awaiting action. So either we've gotten all the review responses or we haven't forwarded it yet. The forwarded for review, so things that are in someone else's court, anywhere where the response is overdue or the overall item is overdue. And then if you have any expected submittals or resubmissions, we would see them in here as well. So if when you're closing something, if you were to reject it, you could have Newforma track an expected resubmission. So we're waiting for somebody to resubmit on something that we rejected, or we ask them to revise and resubmit. And then even if items are closed, we can even see those. Now within these, if I click the plus sign next to any one of these items, we'll see the entire workflow that has occurred. And if I highlight the item as a whole, all of the tabs down at the bottom light up in relationship to the entire workflow of that submittal. So for example, with this submittal, I can see in remarks what was said when we received it, when we forwarded it down here at the bottom, when we got our review responses, when we closed it, and then if there were any files that were included anywhere in this workflow, I would see them here, and I can see at what stage of the workflow that they were included. So received and forwarded, and I can open these up in the viewer or in Adobe, for example. Any emails associated with the submittal. So in the case of this one, maybe it was created from an incoming email. I would have that email already associated. So when we create the submittal from the email, we'll see how that occurs. And then if there were any supporting documents, my related items will also be my submittal actions and record copies, things like that. And then just like we saw with Info Exchange, as this item gets changed, we can see who did what and when, right? So we can see modified action, we approved it, etc. And if I click on any one particular step in the workflow up here, just all the tabs are related to just that one step of the workflow. So the remarks, the files, etc. Okay, so how do they get here? If we're in Outlook and let's say that we have an incoming email and it has an attachment, and let's say that it's a submittal, normally we would think, oh, we're going to file the email to the project and then we need to download the attachment and then log it as received in Newforma. But really we can do all of this from the Outlook add-in up here at the top. So instead of the top part of the button for the file and project, we're actually going to choose the bottom part of this button and say file as, because we want to file the email as something else. So similar to when we were talking about action items and we were creating the action item from the email and we said file as, it's a very similar action. We're just going to say file as, we choose our project, because remember when we're in Outlook, Newforma doesn't know what project we're working on. And we're going to say it is a new submittal. Now notice it could also be a review response. So if we forward to someone and instead of filling out their response through Newforma or through Info Exchange, they just respond to our email and they say, you know, this is the answer, right? I can take that email and log it as the review response to that submittal. So again, I can have it automatically associated and go forward with the workflow. But in this case, it's a new submittal. So we're just going to choose new submittal and say, okay. And we get one more pop-up with the submittals. And it's really, is this an expected submittal? And if so, do we want to relate it to that expected submittal? So if somebody just sent us an email and it was a resubmission for something, we could actually just associate that to the expected resubmission, or if it was an expected submittal. In this case, we're just going to say log a received. And we're going to get our form. And the beauty of this is similar to the action items. A lot of the form is already filled out based on the email. So the from, the to, and that's a wrong email. So let me just update that. That's an old email for our training environment. The subject, it knows the date received. Obviously, my stuff is really old, so I'm just going to update it to today. And it's going to automatically update the due date to be 10 business days from today, but I could modify that. So if I needed to close the submittal sooner, or I knew that we needed to work around a holiday, then I could go ahead and change that due date. We'll talk about the reminder here in just a second. It knows that it came in via email, so I can see that is there already, but it will auto number. Now, in my case, it's going to be auto numbered based on the spec section. So I actually have my spec section is required. So in this case, I'm just going to choose my spec section here. Just going to choose roofing and skylights. And so it's going to base my numbering of my submittal on my spec section. But if I was tracking the ID number for the sender, if they had their own submittal ID number, then I could enter it here. Or if it was part of a package, a package number for a certain set of submittals, I could enter that there. And I can see down here at the bottom, the body of the email comes into the remarks automatically. And the attachment is automatically on the receive files with the email associated to the email log tab. So it's going to attach the email to the submittal, well, associated as a related item, but it's also going to file the email to the project as part of the same process. So similar to when we did our action items, it's going to work in very much the same way here. If we come back to our remarks, you'll notice I have an internal notes section. Internal notes never print on any outward facing form. So not so much with this one, but if it was something that you got in like a physical sample of something, or they sent you an email and you logged it from the email and they said, hey, we're going to send this via courier, you'll get it tomorrow. I might want to put in some internal notes that, the due date was adjusted because we didn't actually get the sample until 3 days later. Or if we got something physical, maybe the box was damaged, or we didn't get all of the samples we were supposed to, or it was an incomplete submission or something like that. I could make some internal notes here that would be discoverable, but they are not going to print on the form itself. So just so you guys know, it's something that you can see internally as a user, but it would not be something that would print on any form. Even if I do a forward for review, it's not going to show there. The other thing I do want to point out here is that remind button up at the top. And the remind, if I have it turned on, and now in my case, I have it turned on 2 days before the due date. So 2 days before the 9th, so on the 7th, it's going to start sending an email as a reminder to close this submittal to Howard, because Howard is the person who logged this as received in new forma, who it came to. So if I turn on the reminder here, then I'm basically reminding myself to close this item. So I could make it even 1 day before, or if I make it 0 on the day that it's due, it's going to remind me to close this submittal. And just like we talked about before, if I'm being reminded of multiple things, I don't get multiple emails. I get one email with everything journalized on it so that it acts more like a checklist for me. I'm not going to worry about the remind in this case. So for those of you that were in the workflow consultation, have you decided how you're going to number submittals? Are you going to manually type those in, have it auto increment, or with a prefix based on spec section?
Lori, I
Yes.
think we're gonna let it auto number, but it'd be good if we can auto number with a prefix. Is that possible?
We can have it auto number with a prefix based on spec section, which is why my spec section was required. So in the project settings, you could change the auto numbering to be with a prefix based on spec section. So just to step back to the project settings, the options here, just to show everyone who is an administrator, in the activity center setup for submittals, the 3 options that you have are just auto increment, so it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, manual entry of the IDs, or auto generate with a prefix based on spec section. So for each spec section, it would have the spec section number, then hyphen, and then like 001. So it would start with number 1 for each spec section.
Very good.
Okay, perfect. So we've got all of this filled out, and if we're ready to forward this for review, then we can go down to our next action down here at the bottom, and we could forward for review. Now, if I was the reviewer and I looked at what was attached and I was ready to answer it, then I could simply go to the respond and close directly from here, like we were talking about with RFIs. I could even do that with submittals. But if I wanted to forward this for review, then I could just say forward for review. And okay, now before I say this, just so you know, if you don't know who's going to handle this yet, and you're like, well, I need to go talk to somebody, but I don't want to forget to log this, I could just uncheck the next action and it would log it as received, but it would sit in the awaiting action bucket in new forma. So it would wait for me to forward it to somebody or close the item. But this way, I can still log it as received, even if I'm not ready to forward it. But in my case, I'm ready to forward it for review. So I'm going to say, okay. And when I forward for review, I have to choose whether or not, if I got files that were included originally, whether or not I want to include them. Now, if I'm forwarding to somebody, in my firm, I don't need to copy the files because the files are already attached to the submittal, and I don't need to make yet another copy to send to that person. But if I am going to forward to somebody externally and I want to send the files, then I need to make sure that this says yes. And normally I will send it through Info Exchange versus email, because if I send it through Info Exchange, I have the ability to track download history. Plus, I don't have to worry about file size limitations. So if I had quite a lot of files, or I wanted to also include a floor plan or something like that, I could go ahead and send it through Info Exchange and then add those additional files and not need to worry about, it getting kicked back because an attachment is too large. Plus, people can just download directly from the email from the hyperlink, just like a standard Info Exchange transfer. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as Info Exchange, and I'm going to forward it. And in this case, I'm actually just going to forward it to myself. Normally, I would forward it to somebody else, but I'm going to forward it to myself. So I'm going to say Howard Work. And there we go. Emails were wrong, they're old. Okay, so it's going to pull over the subject line. It's going to pull over the remarks. It's also, when I click this checkbox, going to calculate the due date. And this due date is for the review response. So not only do I have a due date to close the overall item and respond back to Bob with my answer for, shop drawings or whatever it happens to be, but if I'm going to forward it for review, I want to give a due date to that person to know that, maybe I have 10 days total to have this back to Bob, but I'm going to give, the person who's reviewing maybe 5 or 7 days to review it so that I have time to review their response before I close the item. Because if I get back a response and I'm like, oh, I need somebody else to look at this to clarify XYZ, then I could forward to that other person and I would still have a little bit of a buffer of time. If you have a shorter time frame of turnaround, that's fine. You can have different defaults put in there for your due dates. And even here for the review response, I can even change the due date for that. The reminder here would be to remind the person that I'm forwarding to provide their review response. So it would go from that day every day until the item is either closed or they have provided their review response. Again, if they're being reminded of multiple things, they just get one email. Now, within the remarks, of course, I can append this, add in some additional information. I could say, please review and comment by the due date. And I have my files to send, that one file that I included originally, but notice I can still add more files. So I could add files, I could add folders of files, and remember our document control, I can even include record documents from document control. So if I had a certain revision of a file or something, like the latest revision I wanted to include as reference, I could include those. And if I include them from the record documents, you'll notice the log in document control is checked. So it will mark it as an issuance in document control. So I can choose not to, I could uncheck the box, but if I do include files from record documents, that box will automatically become checked for the log in record documents. So just so that all of you are aware of that. And of course I could add photos, I could have floor plans, Word documents, specs, whatever I want to. Okay, so if I'm ready to forward for review, I'm just going to say forward, and I'm going to also show you the form just because the transmittal form looks a little different. And because I'm sending it through Info Exchange, the Info Exchange pop-up window comes up. It's those same options. When does it expire? Can people download from the email? Can they download partial contents? All that good stuff. And we're just going to say, okay. It's going to scan the files. That's going to create the file transfer, send the email notification. And of course, because, I'm sending this via email, it sends that right away. But I can see here's my submittal transmittal. And obviously it would have your logo on the upper left-hand corner, but it's got the date sent as well as the due date. So people can never say, oh, well, you never told me when it's due. It's on the transmittal. It's also on the email, the body of the email that goes for the notification. And this looks a little weird because I'm sending it to myself, but from and to, and then the list of the files. And the email notification will come in here. So I should have, oh, mine might take a minute. So let me refresh here. Let me take a look at my receive. Sometimes it takes a minute or two with mine. There we go. So here's my submittal forwarded. And if you're forwarding to somebody internally, they can go directly to the submittal in Newforma Project Center. You can also review it and mark it up on Info Exchange. If you were out of the office, you could download all the files directly from the email. And because it's a regular Info Exchange transfer, I can just click on these individual ones and download those individual files if I want to. Also notice in the body, it does tell you the expiration date here. So you do have some of that information. Let's take a look at it though on Info Exchange. So let's say that I was out of the office. I could log in to the project website. Remember, I just need a web browser and I need to be on the project team with web access. And because I clicked on the link within the email, it will take me directly to the submittal. This would be the same as if you were sending it to an external person and they were accessing it through Info Exchange. Is they would see the link, they could click on it, log in, and it would take them directly to that submittal. And they can see the remarks, the files that you sent. But if they're ready to kind of open these up and mark them up, instead of just saying send response, they can say markup and respond. So markup and respond, it's going to open the Newforma web viewer. It's going to show me all of the files and I can switch between them. So here we could say, I want to mark this one up, so I could zoom into maybe that part of the drawing. I could draw a cloud. My mouse is going to work today. There we go. And I'm just going to save my markup session. And it just re-renders the drawing. And I could have chosen another file, but then I could just say send response. It's going to add that markup session. And here my action is required. So as the reviewer, because you'll notice here, send submittal response. As the reviewer, I have a list of what I can choose in the dropdown. And it will be the same no matter who the reviewer is, whether they're internal or external. And your firm controls what is in this dropdown. So for example, if you didn't want it to say approved as noted or something like that, then you can go ahead and have it say whatever you choose if you have different wording. And even if you wanted those items to appear in a different order in the dropdown, you can have it show in a different order. And then that way, maybe the most common items are at the top there. You could have that in there. And then even if it was a reviewer, let's just put in here reviewed. And I could put in some notes in here. And if I had other files that I wanted to place in here as reference, I can add my files. So if there was something in here as why I, wanted this to be marked up this way, then I could include those other files and say send response. Now, whoever forwarded it to me will get an email notification that I have sent in my review response through InfoExchange. So it's not like it goes without saying. But here in Newforma on the InfoExchange website, I can see not only all of the submittals, because remember, I'm logged in as an internal person. I could see all of the submittals, pending incoming, draft, awaiting action, closed, etc. Anything that's kind of open that needs to be reviewed or whatever, I can still respond to if I need to. The my submittal actions will be more of my pending, my open, my completed. And anything expected would show under the expected submittals. An external person, remember, only sees things that they are a party to. So when we look at it from Bob's perspective, he won't be able to see all because he's not named on all. And even in the view that we have here, so let's say I do all, and I see kind of all 4 steps in the workflow, the receive, the forward, the respond, the closed, right? I can see all of these steps, whatever's occurred on any of these items, because I'm internal. When we log in as Bob, you'll see that it will be very different, because not only does he only see things that he's named on, in the way of submittals, but even within a submittal, he only sees the steps of the workflow that he is named on. So for example, if I was your external person and I was sending in a submittal, and let's say Nadia receives it and she forwards it to someone and she gets a review response and she closes it back to me as the external person. When I log into InfoExchange, I will only see what I sent to Nadia and what she sent back when she closed it, because the forwarding to the reviewer and the recording of the review responses, I'm not named on as an external person, so I would not see those in InfoExchange. So just like we saw before with the InfoExchange transfers and emails and action items, things like that, the external person truly only sees things that they should see. They don't see everything. They only see things that they're named on or have been made a party to. You'll also notice here that I can even send in a submittal directly from the website. So we'll do that more as an external person. So we'll take a look at that. But if we go back to Howard's email, he now has that incoming email because the review response was sent in through InfoExchange. And I could view it directly in Newforma. I could review it in InfoExchange. I could download the files. But in this case, let's say we're going to view it in Newforma. So we're going to go directly to Newforma. It's going to go ahead right to that submittal and highlight it, and it's in bold. And that's because this is pending. We have not received that review response. We can still see what was said, but it's still in a pending mode. So here we would just say receive pending review response. Sorry about that, a fit of the sneezes. Okay, so receive pending review response, and it goes ahead and it brings up the form, and we can see everything that, that I typed in when I was doing the review, right? It's got the response filled out, it's got the action, the file that I sent is included with the one that I marked up, right? It's all included here. And from here, I could forward to another reviewer if I want, or I could do a respond and close. So depending on what you want to do. So we're not going to close it yet. We're just going to say cancel. And we're going to actually, we're just going to say, I should have just unchecked that. So we're just going to receive it. We're not going to do anything else. We're just going to record the response so that now when I look at the workflow that has occurred, I can see that it was received, when, from whom, how did it come in? It came in via email. We forwarded it for review via InfoExchange. We had the review response. We can see what that response was, and that it was also done through InfoExchange. And now let's say that somebody else is going to review it internally, but we don't need to forward it to them. They just need to go in and look at the file. Or even if it was forwarded to them and they're going to review it in Newforma, they can simply come to that submittal, come to the file summary so we can see what we received, what we forwarded, what was included with the review response. So we can say, oh, this was the one that was reviewed by Howard. So I'm going to take a look at that one because maybe I need to stamp it or I need to add another markup or what have you. I can open this with the new Forma viewer. Notice I can see that markup, right? Because it's flattened into a PDF now because this is the marked up file, not the original file without the markup. But I could still do more markups on this file. So I could maybe go back into here and let's move this down. And let's say I want to put in a leader with a call out here and say, and I don't want it in black. There we go. And if I wanted to, I could also right click on it and put a shape around it. There, no problem. And then let's say that's the only notation I want to add, but I want to also stamp it with a stamp on this sheet somewhere. So to do that, I can simply just click on my stamp. And if I have previously browsed to a stamp before in the viewer, it will show like you see here. It'll actually give me the ones that I've previously used, so I could just choose from one of those. If I've never used a stamp before, when I click on the stamp the first time, it will actually open directly in a window that looks like this, which is your folder structure for your project. But notice I could browse to anywhere on my network, on my desktop, whatever. So if you have stamps that you use now, electronic stamps, then by all means, you can just browse to them and use them. I'm actually going to use the new Forma stamp, so I'm just going to use my submittal detailed stamp. And the reason why I use the new Forma stamp is A, it's already filled out for me because it is dynamic, and B, it's already there, right? I don't have to browse to it. So it's going to pull in the project, the subject, the company name, the project number, the submittal ID, the received on date, the reviewed on date, and it knows who I am by who I'm logged into new Forma as, so it fills that out as well. And then I can choose my action. Now, again, this is also that, that stamp content so that it's more the approval part of it. So this is where in this stamp, the dropdown is a little bit different than if I'm doing the review response through Info Exchange. But again, your firm controls what's in this dropdown. So if you want it to say something different, that's fine. In my case, I'm going to say approved as noted. And when I say okay, it's going to give me my stamp and I can place it wherever I want. But because it's just really an image once I do this, I could move it, if I need to move it out a little bit. And let's move this down. Actually, we're going to move it down here. Let's go into here. See if I can get that moved. Let's go. Let's try that. There we go. So I've placed that there, but I could move it if I wanted to. So let's go back into here and then just drag that down here. And if you want to make it look a little old school, you could tilt it to make it look off center, to make it look like an old school stamp if you want to. But all of that verbiage that's in there is truly what is included with the new Forma stamp. Now you can take the new Forma stamp, bring it out into AutoCAD and modify it and create your own stamp from it. That's fine. Or if you have other stamps that you use, that's totally fine as well. So the verbiage may not be exactly what you wanted. Sometimes people will change that. But once I have that stamped and I have my notation made and I'm ready to kind of either provide a review response or close this, I can simply choose my PDF button at the top, the same one that we used when we created the flattened PDF with all of the markup sessions like we did previously. I can just choose that button, but instead of send or create PDF like you see here, I'm going to choose record workflow action because remember we have those steps in the workflow. So instead of having to save it first and then go back into the submittal and record workflow action, I can kind of do it while I'm still here in the viewer, and it's going to know which submittal we're looking at. And I could say respond and close or record review response. Either one works. I'm going to do the respond and close. Notice it is going to flatten it into a PDF and it names it, but it puts that tag at the beginning for the submittal and it makes it super long. I might actually take all that out and just rename this one PDF and say final maybe. And then that way when I say okay, it's going to flatten all this with the stamp, with the markup that I've done, and attach it to the step in the workflow that I'm doing. So the respond and close. It's going to be here. So here's that one that I just named final. Let's go ahead and move that over. There we go, for final. And at the top, it always tells you what you're doing. So respond to submittal and close. So I'm responding back to Bob. I'm doing the 4th step in the workflow. And I'm going to choose approved as noted, because even though I chose that from the dropdown, it does not fill in here. It's just for the stamp, because you could have people stamp it different ways. Like maybe the electrical person says it's okay, and the mechanical person says, well, there's approved as noted, and maybe somebody else says just no action taken. So I could have several stamps on there that wouldn't determine what the final respond and close answer is. So in this case, I'm just going to say approved as noted. And here I could even choose this little button right here to pull in the review summary that we filled out on InfoExchange. So reviewed, see, and closed. Or I could manually type in whatever I want as the response down here. If I'm ready to respond back to Bob, it's going to try to send it back in the way that he sent in the submittal, which was through email. But if I am attaching something, I will probably want to send it back through InfoExchange. So I'm not going to worry about showing you the form. We're just going to say create. It's going to give us our InfoExchange options, and we're going to say okay. So the viewer will still be open once this finishes. And if I want to save this markup session that I did, I will just click on the save in the upper left-hand corner, just like a normal markup session. It still flattened everything to associate it to the submittal, but if I also want to have a record of the markup that I did, then I can just save the markup session. It's not going to change the response or anything like that. So now if we look at the submittal, it should be down in the closed. So I'm going to choose our skylight. And we can see the steps in the workflow: received, forwarded, review response, respond and close, approved as noted, and of course, all of the files included, all of the remarks included. And at this point, if I needed to change my answer, I would need to reopen the submittal and then do the respond and close again. So if I chose the wrong answer, or maybe I got in another review response later, like the next day, and I'm like, okay, well, this changes what our overall answer is, I could still record the review response at any time, and it would just show below the respond and close. But if that review response changes what that respond and close action should have been, so maybe it goes from approved as noted to revise and resubmit or something like that, I would want to actually reopen the submittal and then close it again with that new action, so that I would have all of the steps in the workflow recorded. Now, if you record a response and you record it on the wrong submittal, you could highlight that step and just undo the action. It will be gone though. So you would still see, not in the related item, sorry, in the change log, you would still see that that action was undone, but you would never be able to go back to, say, the files that were included or the comments that were there or anything like that. You wouldn't see those anymore, but you would see that the action had been undone. Questions?
I have a question, Laurie.
Sure.
When you were sending that submittal, you were sending it through a transmittal. That transmittal number is in sequence with any transmittal that we send through document control. Is that correct?
It's in sequence with any transmittal for anything sent through Newforma. So not just issuances and document control, but all file transfers, RFI forwarding or submittal forwarding, any of those. It will be sequential across the entire project for anything that has a transmittal.
Okay, good. Thanks.
But the submittal ID, if we look here, and I've changed my numbering a couple of times, so mine is always going to look a little weird, but in my case, it's going to have the spec section number and then -001. So the next submittal that I have for that particular spec section, it would have the spec section number again, it would be -002.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so with the Activity Center here, if we take a look, let's actually just look at under review. So all of the open items, and I'm going to take off my grouping. I have it grouped here by last action, but I'm going to turn off that grouping. You can see I've changed my numbering a couple of times, but anything that is in red means that it is overdue. So either the overall item is overdue or the review response is overdue. And mine are overdue in general just because they're so old, but I can see if it's not overdue, that's when it's still in black, right? So it was received on a certain day, but the due date is October 3rd. So until it hits October 3rd, it will not be overdue. So it will be in black. And then if I'm looking at all of these and I want to print a report, I have the create report function over here under the left, under the tasks. And if I'm running a standard log report, just like we saw before, it's what you see is what you get. So when I'm looking at this report, whatever columns in whatever order, when I run the report in Excel, that's exactly what I have, right? The same columns, the same order, the same line items, etc. But there are some that are pre-configured. So similar to when we were looking at the action items that we have specialized reports, we have those in RFIs and submittals as well. So in this case, I have some that are pre-configured. The only one you won't have is the status test, but I can have it grouped by status, by responsible company. And the design review report is probably one of my favorites because it's like clicking the plus sign next to each item, but having that on a report. So I can see what actions have been done on each particular item that I'm running this report on. The columns are already pre-selected. The formatting is already done for you, similar to the action item reports. And like I said, you could have some that are like by status. Maybe it's already grouped by status for those items, so that I could see all the ones that are open or open overdue. I can see how many days late responding. Mine obviously are very old. And because I turned on the hyperlinks before, they will be in the report, which means that anybody internally can just click on those and it goes directly to that item in Newforma Project Center. So you do have some pre-configured reports available to you. Through Info Exchange, if I'm looking at the view, submittals, and I'm just going to close that report real quick. From within here, any screen that I'm looking at, I can export into a PDF, Excel, RTF, CSV. So even if I was out of the office, I could still print this into a PDF or an Excel report that I could use when I'm out of the office. So just know that you guys have access to that. Now for external people, let's say that we want to take a look at what Bob sees. So if we come over to Bob and let's take a look at this, let's go to just log into Info Exchange. So again, we're logging in as Bob, as an external person. It's his email and whatever password he set up for himself. And we're actually going to go back to the project home. You'll notice on the left, the send shortcuts here for your external user. Send files, send submittal, send RFI, send change order proposal, whatever you have turned on for that project out of those four. But if we were to say send submittal, when the sender is sending in their submittal, they can put in their own ID number. So whatever their ID number is, the subject. So I could say, and they can send it to anyone on the project team. So they could send it to multiple people. I'm going to CC somebody else just to let them know. And it's for review. And if Bob happens to know the spec section number, he can choose it from the drop down from the list that you have provided. So if he wanted to type in his own spec section and it wasn't in your list, he wouldn't be able to choose it. But it is not a required field for him. So it's not like he's forced to use one of your numbers. If he just doesn't see the number, he can just ignore it. And then he could say, like C enclosed for the lighting in Conf A. And then he could add some files. So he could either add files or just drag and drop into there. We're just going to choose some files in here and add them. And he can just say send submittal. So he can send those into you very easily and quickly using Info Exchange. He doesn't have to worry about file size limitations to have that shown. And then, of course, it's pending because we have not received it yet. This is a different one, sorry. So here's the lighting conference room A. It's pending because we have not received it internally yet. And you'll notice here what Bob sees. He sees all my actions, my open actions, my pending, my completed. He doesn't see all for the project. So he can see the 4 steps: receive, forward, respond, and close. He can see those columns. But unless he's named on that step of the workflow, he doesn't see it. So what's common to see with external people is they'll see what's been received by you, what they sent in, and they'll be able to see what you included when you close the item. But the middle part of the review, unless he's named on it, he doesn't see it here. So it's still hidden from him. And then if he's not hidden on any of the steps in the workflow for a submittal, he doesn't even see the submittal in this listing. So it's very
Sorry, can I ask a question here, please?
Of course.
Okay, so when an external sends us a submittal, can I record it in my document control, then issue it so all parties can see it, and then start a workflow?
No, because even if I get the email, and I think we had this question when we did document control as well, is if somebody just sends me files, or if they send me the submittal through Info Exchange, when I see, sorry, I went to the wrong place. So if I see it here through Newforma, and I have those attachments, obviously those files that they sent, when I say receive pending submittal, there's no option for me to say log in document control. Like the files are here, they're received, but there's no button or anything in here to say log in document control. It will have them in your folder structure, so it will mark them as received. So if we say, actually, let's just say receive pending, and we have those 4 files and we receive the pending submittal, and let's say we're not ready to do anything with it yet. So we just have those attachments. So it's now in the awaiting action. And those files are here. Yeah. But to see them in the file system, you could say select in file system just to know where Newforma places them. It's placing them here under your communication or Newforma folder, transfers incoming, and it's listed here as lighting conference room A in mine. So this is where they are. I would need to then, if I wanted to log them in document control, I would want to make sure that I came into the document control activity center and I would log them as a revision from file or as a new record document from there. And I would browse to this location to pull those files.
Yes.
Okay. But if you want an external person to be able to see like all files included with contract management, the easier way, instead of having to always log it into document control and then issue it so that they can see it, is within the security for your external user, you might want to modify the submittal to say, instead of only show items that the team member is on, to show all, or show all items that the team member's company is on, so that if somebody else in their company sent it, they would see it. But if you're talking about like an owner or something like that, you might want to say show all here so that they see all steps of the workflow and they see all the files included. And then you could uncheck the create, because maybe they would never create a submittal. So that way it would be more read only, but they would be able to see all of the workflow without having to issue things through document control or log them in document control and then do the issuance so that they see them. It's just another option to think about.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So along that lines, when we receive it, it goes through the same workflow. If we're back with Bob as an external user and we're talking RFIs, notice you have the ability to send in an RFI directly from InfoExchange. So again, Bob could put in his sender ID, he could put in his subject. So we could say retaining wall. Maybe he has a question about the retaining wall, and we're going to send it to Howard and maybe Chet and Adam. And we're going to say request for information, and he can put in his question, are we moving the retaining wall to make room for the parking spaces near the kitchen? And he could put in his own suggestion, right? So he could say, I think we are according to the floor plan that I saw last week. Who knows? And if he had any files or anything to include, he could add them. But otherwise, he can just send in his RFI. And he'll get the activity center on InfoExchange. So we'll give mine just a second. So again, retaining wall, pending. But even if we looked at all of his RFIs that he's been involved in, again, it's got those 4 steps, but he only sees the steps that he's involved in. So he can see what he asked and what was answered. But if anything was forwarded internally, he has no idea. But he can see here what he sent in. Now, again, because he sent it to those 3 individuals, they would get an email notification. RFI received, retaining wall. And even if Bob or Howard was out of the office, if somebody else was in Newforma and they happened to see the RFI and maybe they're checking on their own RFIs and they're like trying to clear stuff out and they're covering for Howard while he's out of the office, they could always come into the pending and see that there was a pending, RFI coming in, and that it was sent to, to Chet and Howard and, whoever. And anybody internally can receive this pending RFI. It doesn't have to be one of the recipients internally. It could be anyone. So we can see who sent it in, what they asked, etc. And then if I was ready to answer it, I could just say respond and close to respond back to Bob. And I could send it through email unless I need to send an attachment or something like that, and it's answered. And I could say, who knows, right? And so then I could just say create to create the email to respond back to Bob and close the RFI. So it's going to create the email. It will always have a transmittal. So that's okay. If you don't want to include the transmittal, you can just delete it. But it's got the answer right here anyway. And I could say send and file in RFI, because the email is going to automatically have the RFI tag at the end. And I could just say send and file in RFI. So that when I'm looking at that closed RFI for the retaining wall, I can still see all of the workflow. I can see it came in through InfoExchange. We closed it out through email. I could see the email log, any files if I had any, related items, so the RFI actions, etc. So it looks very similar to the submittal, but it's just an RFI and not a submittal. So again, they can send it in through InfoExchange. If they send it in through email, Let me close out some of my emails in here. Oh, I closed Outlook. Hold on. Let me reopen Outlook. If they send it in through email, I can also receive it via email. So for example, if they send in, let's say here, to move the wall, if they sent it in this way, I could say file as, choose my project, and file it as a new RFI. And again, filing the email as to the project as part of the workflow. But again, a lot of the email or a lot of the form is already filled out based on that email. And then I could simply go to the respond and close from here, or I could just log it as a received RFI. So I could see that here now in the awaiting action. Here's the one that we just received. Sorry, my email keeps coming up with that. But I could see that it's received, but we haven't done anything with it yet. And anyone internally could forward it for review from here, record responses, and even go to the respond and close directly. If they were like, oh yeah, that's what we're going to do. They could just go directly to the respond and close. You could also send an email about the RFI to the sender, to the recipients, to the reviewers, to all participants, and just send it directly if you wanted to, just to send the information if you wanted to. Okay, the reports here are very similar to what we saw before. You have the log report. What you see is what you get, right? Whatever columns in whatever order, whatever line items. And then you also have these specialized reports, QA by status. And there's also another log report in here that's configured a little differently, just so that I think it's a little bit more compressed. It's easier to read. You know, when it was created, forwarded to, first forward, last reviewed. It's a nice way to kind of see that and have that right there at your fingertips at any time. The other thing I want to point out to you that you may not have noticed before is when you have a project highlighted here on the My Projects or the All Projects, you do have an open item listing down here at the bottom, right? So with that one project highlighted, I could, let me move this up a little bit. I could see all the open items, and because I have the filters, I could filter to only show me open RFIs and submittals without having to go to the project and look in the activity center. And of course, anything red is overdue. So it's nice to kind of see it that way. I could also sort it by due date. So if I wanted to look for the most overdue, this one doesn't have a due date at all, but I could see the most overdue. So it goes from red to blue to black. Blue means that it's due within the next 8 days. So I have the blue, the black is because it's due longer than 8 days from now, and the red is overdue. And then of course I can apply the team filter to either see all, everything that people are involved in, or just me. So I can do that as well. And at any time you can change this filter. You could clear it. You want to say everything over, open or what have you. And then if I wanted to see this across a different project, I could just highlight it. I don't think I have much of anything in these, so let me just move this down a little bit. Might have something in my Fowler Square project. But yeah, so I could, let's say I want to say action items, RFIs, maybe. I could see that one, and then I could go directly to the other project, and it would be action items and RFIs. So I can easily switch between projects. And if I wanted to modify it, I just double click on it. This one actually has been forwarded, so I wouldn't be modifying that particular item, but I could open it to modify it if I want to modify that RFI. But it's just a nice way to kind of see it on the fly without having to go into that particular project. If you want to report across multiple projects, so let's say I want to run a report for open RFIs and submittals across both of these projects, then instead I'm going to choose the view in window and say select projects, because both of these are not on my projects. So I'm just going to filter down to which projects I want to see. And when I say okay, it's going to give me a pop-up window and it's going to start to display everything that's open for both of those projects. But again, here I can filter down to just RFIs, submittals, and let's say action items. And then I could sort it by type, by due date. So I could have it by due date and then by type if I want to. I could put that in a different order too. I could put it by due date and then type, so I could see the due date within the action item, then within the RFI, then within the submittal. And if I want to run it as a report, I have the report button right down here, and I could create that as a log report. So just know you can kind of report across multiple projects that way with open items if you want to, like if you're trying to do a status meeting for a certain discipline and they have a lot of different projects and you want to look at all the open items or certain open items across all of those projects, by all means, you can run a report like that. It's just this view in window. And you'll want to make sure that the team filter is probably set to everybody versus just me. But then it's just either the my projects or select projects, and then you can just run that from there. The other thing that you will notice is there is a multi-project report. I don't think it's quite as nice, but it's up to you. I like to see just the open items. This one does allow you to do an item count report or a summary report or even a log report, but then it's across like one activity center. Whereas if you wanted to do a summary report, maybe by week or month or a date range for across activity centers, you could do that as well. So just know you do have a couple of options for reporting either at the individual project level or across multiple projects. In addition to the, the very standard reports that you have when you're looking here, and let's say that I'm just looking at the submittals, I could, export this into a PDF or an Excel or RTF, CSV. I have a couple of options there as well. It's not quite as robust, but if you are out of the office, it's a nice way to be able to create a very easy report that I could provide to someone with some basic information. Okay, questions on RFI and submittal workflow?
We are good.
Well,
Okay.
I have one question about one of the fields. This was the review order.
Yes. So
Yeah.
if you're so like when you receive an RFI or submittal or anything really, in the contract management, you do have the review order button down here. And that's if when you do your forward for review, if it needs to go specifically to one person and then the next person and then the next person, instead of just sending it to all three of them at the same time to review, you could click on the review order and add them, and you'll choose them in the order that you want them to review the item. So you could say it goes to Mary Ann, then Chet, then Adam. So that when, let's say that Bob sent this in, and we're going to just make up a submittal here. And we'll choose a spec section. It's fine. And we'll just leave it as is. We'll say that it came in via second air. Okay, so then when we do the forward for review, it's only going to be addressed to Mary Ann because Mary Ann was the first reviewer. But I'm going to CC myself just to show you what the email looks like. And we're going to say send it via email, and we're going to give her a due date. And we're going to say forward. So it's only addressed to the first person. And then when the email goes to Mary Ann, so first it's going to come up and then we can send it. But notice when it goes to Mary Ann, it'll say you've been forwarded submittal information to review. The sequence of the review cycle is blah, right? After completing, send an email including any marked up files to the next person on the list. Please CC Howard on your response. If you're the last reviewer, send it to Howard. So in this case, and if it was going through Info Exchange, it would also have very similar information. It would just flow a little bit easier, but it would still need to send an email to the next reviewer to let them know. It doesn't automatically send it to Chet. Marianne would have to send an email to Chet and say, okay, I've done my review. It's your turn. And then Chet would also need to see, that he needs to send it to Adam.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
But yeah, that's really good if you do have that review order. Like the mechanical person has to look at it first, then the electrical, then then the GC or whatever, whatever order it needs to go into, you could have that review order set so that when you do the forward for review, it goes to the first person and then the next person and then the next person.
Good.
Cool. Okay. So, Nadia, you said you had some questions about document control, so we'll go ahead and take those now.
Okay, very good. I'll
Sure.
check with RFI. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We can switch to document control from the activity center, Laurie, if we could,
Sure.
please.
Yep.
Okay. So my first question, and I think you did mention it the other day, was the transmittal form. Laurie, we need to customize it to show file number, revision, title, and the purpose of that file.
Right.
Is it possible?
So that would be something that you would need to talk to our support folks about, because we do have a nice woman in support who knows all the forms inside and out, and she would be able to let you know if that's possible. And if so, she can provide you some information on customizing that form, that particular form. And then that way, if it is possible, you could customize your form to show that. But she would be the one that would let you know. So you could just forward that to support@newforma.com and just let her know exactly which form you're looking at and which fields exactly you want it. Like if you already have an example of what you're using now and you kind of want it to look that way, include that example so that she has a good idea of exactly what you're looking at.
Very good.
Uh-huh.
I shall do that.
Sure.
Second thing, when you're adding revision from files, is there a way that so when you're adding revision from files, you're actually linking the files and they get registered in your document control as a draft, first thing?
Right. It doesn't move the file. It's just pointing to it.
It's just pointing to it. But at the same time, when you create a transmittal, it grabs the file from that location. Is that correct, right?
Correct. It grabs it from the original location and it creates it creates a record copy when you do the file transfer. So at that point in time, it would make a snapshot of the files that you're sending with the issuance.
Correct. So Laurie, our practice is such that the discipline guys, they stay in working folder. They or I can link the files to the working folders. But the final copy that needs to be issued out is moved to is copied to the approved folder, which is it's converted from DWG file to a PDF file, and from there I need Newforma to grab the files. So if the initial linking is done to the working folder, and now I link to the approved folder, Newforma is going to rev up the drawing. I want that revving up to be skipped somehow. Is that possible?
No. When you add that additional file here and you say either add files or add folder, if I were to pull these files in, so let's say it's add all of those, it's going to auto link them and add them as the next revision. These just didn't have an auto link, but let's say that, let's see, the closest you could do is you could highlight all the quote unquote new revisions, the ones that are now the final, and you could, I wonder if you could make them revision number 2, like give them the same number. I doubt you can though. Let's see. If I highlight all of those, say I add all of those, and I say the new revision is 02, I don't think it's gonna, like it just looks like it's adding it for that one. But let's say that we add that. I'm just curious if it's gonna allow me to have 2 revision number 2s. It will. Like I added a new revision number 2, like I added it and it marked it as revision number 3, but I forced it to be revision number 2, and it accepts it because it's in a different location.
Right.
And it will be in draft, and then you could issue from that. So what you might want to do is, let's say that we do the add revisions from files one more time. I'm going to add another revision number 2, but I'm going to name it a little differently. So let's say that this is your final folder, right? This is your approved folder. And we add all of these. And we put these in here, and it's, let's say that we're gonna force this one to be, actually, did it link it? Hold on. Yeah, so we have a new revision, and now it marks it as revision number 4 because it knows that there are that there's like an 01, 2 02s, and then there was like another one. So this is revision number 4, but if I'm adding that, like, let's say it's the final of revision number 2 is what it should be. When I come into here, I could highlight all of these and make them revision number 2 again. And then I could say in my revision description, I could say final of revision 2, whatever it happens to be, to put in that description, so that then when I add this, when I see the revision history, see now it says it's still, and I don't think it's going to take revision number 2 again because I have it in there too many times, but it would say final of revision number 2. I would rather have you just auto number it and then just put in the revision description as revision number, final revision, or, whatever it happens to be. I'm okay with the revision number just going up and up and up, because if you're putting in a description, you would easily be able to see which one was issued and things like that. So it might make it a little bit easier than trying to keep track of multiple revision number 2s or whatever it happens to be, because you might want to be very careful of how you number them, because I think at any given time, if it has the same number, it can only have one draft and one issued, which is why on this one, it wouldn't take 2, because it already has an issued revision number 2 and a draft revision number 2. Let me see if I can change the revision state. Let me try one more thing while we're thinking this through. Let me pull in the keywords. Say revision state, draft approved, pending approval, not approved. I don't think I have that one. Hold on. Let's see, pending approval.
Lori, I would not be issuing, no, I may get to issue the same revision 2 times, one as a PDF file and one as a CAD file.
Right, so you would want them to be different revision numbers so that you would know which one you're issuing. Because like when I have them highlighted,
it just revs up.
It revs up, but you could change the revision you could put a suffix on it and say O2 CAD for the CAD revision and O2 PDF. And then that way you could keep them both as draft, I think. And then that way when you're issuing and you say issue selected record documents, you could say select revision, and you would see like O2 CAD and O2 PDF. And then that way you would know which ones you're pulling. That might work.
Oh, sure, I'll try.
So here, let's try it real quick while I'm here. So I'm just going to delete all of these. You would never do this in document control, but I'm just going to delete them all. So let me just delete those. Hold on.
How did you delete all? Do I have the rights to delete all?
I just deleted them, but you would never do that just because it has history associated to it. I do it in my training environment to delete them. But normally most people don't. So let's say that I'm just going to add my first revision. So let's go back up and add my first revision. And I'm just going to worry about adding these. I'm not going to worry about adding everything.
Yeah.
So let's go through there and say create. And let's say that this is all, we'll say this is revision number, and we're going to put a suffix, and it's going to be 01 CAD. So let's pretend that's CAD. Let's pretend it's CAD. So we're just going to add those. right? So revision number 1. And then when it gets final, we're going to say add revisions, add files, and let's just add our next revision.
Yes,
It's going to add those in. And it's going to link them all, right? Except we're going to say, we're just going to choose the ones that are changed because those are the only ones that were linked. And on all of these, we're going to change the revision suffix. We're going to say the new revision number is still 01, and we're going to put in a suffix of PDF, right? So we're going to add those. So we're going to have 2 revision number 1s, but one's going to be CAD, one's going to be PDF. And then that way, when you're ready to issue, you could just highlight them, say issue selected revision, and you could have 01 CAD or 01 PDF. That way you know which ones you're issuing.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that might be the easier way to handle that, because that way you can still have the working drawings in their file, and then you can copy them and place them into the final file and mark them as revisions. But when you add them from that like approved file, when you're ready to issue, still add them as revisions, but maybe just make sure that you change the revision number and then put PDF after the end or something, so that you know when you come into issue that you're only pulling the PDFs, you're not pulling the CAD files.
Good.
That might help.
And pulling new format links file from where you have linked it to, regardless of what revision number you're stating over here, right?
Right. It's wherever you browse to.
Linked.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you do the add revisions from files, you just browse to either the folder or the files, and that's where you're pulling those files from.
Right.
And that's what it lists here in the source file.
Yes.
So that's how it knows where to browse to. Like in one, it was in my DD folder, and then the other one, it was in my CD folder.
Yes. Okay, you answered this question. Glory, this is more like project setting questions. So
Sure.
when we go to project setting, it tells us where our transmittals will be saved. It says like all record issues will go to wherever you have passed it to. So I understand that if you're issuing submittals, RFIs, anything with a transmittal, it all goes under record. What is it? Record copy something?
So it depends on which option you have selected here. So if you have the first one selected like I do, if it is an outgoing, like a respond and close to a submittal, and you're sending it with a transmittal, then it would be under the outgoing. So in my case, it would be under a communications folder, transfers outgoing. But if you're storing it in project subfolders, it would go under whatever this location is, and it would have a subfolder under record copies for submittals, and it would be under there. So it depends on which of these radio buttons that you have selected for this section of the project settings for your project.
Okay, so what's an incoming transfer? So
if somebody sends something in through Info Exchange, or if you log it as incoming, because sometimes what you can do is something comes in as a physical sample, you could come into the transmittals and log an incoming transmittal just to have a record of it associated to the project. So you could just log it as received, who sent it to you, how they sent it, and maybe a description or remarks of what they sent. That way, at least you would have a transmittal for that incoming transfer, so that you would have a record of it in case, it does come in via courier. This way, at least it's associated to the project. You would still have a record of it with the project records.
So Laurie, doesn't this answer all my questions? Like, I was worried that anything that comes in, I have to pass it to that folder and register it in document control. But instead of doing that, I can log it as incoming transmittal.
But the no. The transmittal is just the sheet of paper that goes with the transfer. It's not, and it's just like the data. It's just the files associated with it, because when you log it as an incoming email, like if it's an incoming email with attachments, then if it's logged in as an action item, then it goes into the specific part related to action items for all of their backups. So it goes back to that project settings question, is that if it's an incoming thing and you log it in and it has attachments, then it would go wherever the incoming is for that particular project. It doesn't know to go to document control, and I can't log it as received into document control.
Okay, so good.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
little different. Yeah, the Transmittal Activity Center is more just to keep track of all of the sheets that are the cover sheets for when I send a transfer or when we log something as received, like a physical thing that comes in via courier or hand delivery or even fax or something. If I want to log it that way, then I can do it that way and have a record of it.
Okay.
Because not everybody sees that courier come in. So it's nice to have it with the project.
Yes, absolutely. Laurie, this is more like a housekeeping question. When you send the documents through Transmittal, it creates a zip folder by date, and I think it grabs what the purpose of the document of that package was. And then it saves a transmittal outside of that zipped folder under the same folder. Can that transmittal be zipped together with the files that are associated with that transmittal?
Not to my knowledge. I believe it will always be separate. I can check. Let me check 12th edition and see whether it changed in 12. I don't believe it did. I believe you're running 12th edition, but I don't believe it changed in 12th edition either. So let me just double check on that real quick. I'll just log into my other training environment. It'll take just a second.
And at the same time, can you customize the name of how that zipped folder is named?
I
Like
can't
would
change
want
that.
No? Okay. That's fine.
Yep. So if I look at my project, and you're talking about a submittal, right?
Transmittals.
Yeah, transmittal for like a submittal. Yeah, so let me look at one that I did as a closed. Actually, it'll be easier if I find it this way. So let me just look at my project settings. So see, like in this case, it's going under my communications record copies. So let me look at it on this one. Sometimes they set it up as a new forma folder. Let's see. So submittals. Oh, I probably didn't have anything attached to that one. Yeah, the transmittal will always be separate. Even in well, not always, but at least in 12th edition, in the most recent release, it is still separate. And it auto numbers them or auto names them a specific way because it links them to other things in Newforma for searching and things like that. So it has a specific way that it names it for that protocol. Yeah.
I think it would be a question for support, but I don't know, Laurie, each drawing can be, like if there's multiple drawings under a transmittal, it could be going for different purpose. Like some could be going for construction, but one or two in there could be going out for review and comments. Is there a way to do it in our transmittals?
So are you talking about in transmittals or are you talking about submittals? Like which activity center are we talking about?
Transmittals.
Okay, so like an incoming transfer?
Oh, sorry, it would be in document control.
Okay.
So from document control, you're issuing a transmittal with a bunch of files. So I'm saying if 9 out of those are issued for construction and 1 is going out for review.
Right.
Can we specify that?
So you can choose which files you issue, and you can even have overlap, but you could highlight some files and then say issue selected record documents. So you could say here, issue selected record documents, latest revision or what have you. And then within the description of contents, I mean, I can't even put a note in here, but yeah, I can't change that. So it would be just issued, right?
Just go.
And then in the
Yeah.
drop down, I could have it for review and comment, but I would have to have it as a separate issuance. It would have to be a separate package of documents. So I can't mark some as for approval and some for review and comment. They would have to be two different packages of documents.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it, Laurie, for now at least.
Okay, sure. But like I said, if you have other stuff come up, just send me an email.
I will.
Yeah, and I'll send you the recording later today. And then, like I said, if you guys have follow-up questions on the RFIs and submittals, just send them my way. But definitely those questions about your form customization, I would say send that to support@Newforma.
Any other technical, I would say not technical, but you know how global and admin rights come in, what we can customize, what are the keywords, what is drop-down list, questions like that. Laurie, who should we talk to?
Oh, you can send those my way, and if they're more support related, I'll just forward it and let you know that I forwarded it to support. My concern is more I'm traveling a lot, so if I can't, if I don't have the bandwidth to dig into the details to get an answer for you, I usually forward it to support. But if I can answer it super quick, I'll just respond.
Sure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Not a problem, Nadia. You have a great day.
You too, Laurie.